65 years ago, after the failure of D-Day, the Soviets took control over mainland Europe and imposed their communist revolution on the continent. While we for a while had an American ally, they soon collapsed as the Soviets won the Cold War. Since then we have lost all our colonies except a few islands, but we still retain our democracy and are holding off Soviet influence. So together with the Irish and the unity government in Ulster, we are seen as the last bastion of European democracy. And despite our isolationism, our economy is doing okay. However, the government still has to invest into it sooner or later, since we are far behind the communist powers in industrial capability. Other than that, there isn't much going on. The Scots are complaining as usual, and our Prime Minister David Owen is surprisingly popular. But then tragedy struck. As Owen and his deputy were out hunting, the Secret Service became aware of a threat. But it was too late. He was pierced by a bullet and died a few minutes later. As all flags fly half-mast throughout the Union, the question is raised: what comes next? Our country is in turmoil and a snap election seems like the only thing that could fix it. But Queen Elizabeth had other plans in mind. Despite it being unofficially illegal, she made her way towards the House of Commons and entered it since no one stopped her. There she proclaimed the parliament dissolved and that radical reform was needed to safeguard our country from the communist threat which had, according to her, assassinated Owen. And with the parliament dissolved, the government collapsed and was quickly replaced by a cabinet loyal to Her Majesty. She will bring back stability, end the communist threat and make Britain a world power once again. Long live the Queen. But first, the threat of the democratic parties who seek to restore democracy needs to be dealt with. By threatening both the Social Democrats and the Conservatives, we got them both to pledge their support for the Queen. The far right were far easier to get on our side. After meeting with their leaders, the Queen got them to support the royal cause after appealing to their patriotism and pride. With enough political stability now, the first reforms can be initiated, starting by giving back a lot of power to the House of Lords that they had lost throughout the century allowed us to pass reforms easier. And the first one that was introduced was the British Security Act. The MI6 will be largely expanded to cover internal security as well, so that no Soviet spy or unloyal citizen can come close to carry out their dark objectives. Next up, minor economic reforms were started to get the market up and running again. This went hand in hand with the creation of a new Privy Council whose job it is to advise the Queen on certain issues, including not only an economic advisor but also a war advisor, which will come in handy in the future. In the meantime, Rupert Murdoch, our industry minister, had begun to influence the media to only portray the elitist side of our country, which will grant us massive benefits for our industry and power. Next came a ton more economic reforms, starting by lowering welfare, something that will be unpopular but help our economy in the long run. And then we held the Queen's Corporate Conference. There were not only British corporations invited, but all willing to benefit Her Majesty's realm are welcomed. At the conference were several construction companies that have announced their readiness to start new projects. So we put significant investment into them and gave them the task to construct new factories in England. We began by building 4 military factories to help relieve the equipment deficit of our small army and prepare ourselves for the future. Then we built 2 civilian factories. All these reforms and economic investments have been done as the House of Commons is still disabled. This has created worry from foreign investors who see our country as too turbulent to invest in, while some suggest we abolish the House completely to restore full confidence in our country. The Queen has decided to restore the House. But not like it was before, of course. This House of Commons will only serve as a puppet parliament following all orders from Her Majesty. And to project full unity under the Queen, a grand coalition was formed, with everyone from the Conservatives to the Social Democrats and Liberals. This helped out massively to restore confidence, and investment flooded into the country from everywhere. With all the extra money we finished our building projects in England, investing both into urban and rural development, greatly improving the infrastructure in both. With that, the English economy is soaring and we have surpassed the French in civilian industry. Together with rising world tension, it has justified our change to early mobilization, where we will take some consumer goods and use it for military purposes. While it will be an unpopular change, by holding a national royal holiday, it will go under the radar of everyone. We can also use this excellent opportunity to further strengthen the MI6 with new technology, so that they can spy on the people more effectively. With the economy now doing great and our political stability secured, there is only two things left before the days of glory can be recaptured. To calm down the Scots, who have gotten increasingly angry after we mostly only invested in England, and to strengthen and reform our army. We started by scrapping the laws prohibiting the Queen to utilize her army so that she will be able to use it without the consent of the Parliament. We then turned to Scotland, where we started diplomatic talks with them to try and resolve the issue. It will come with appeasement, but at least the resistance will stop. However, this made the English furious. But by reminding them that the Queen isn't only the Queen of England but also of Scotland and Wales, we could recover from the backlash. Back to the military, a while back we started a massive expansion of it, mostly focused on our navy, which had rotten away during the years. The reforms were done by constructing new dockyards who constructed new ships and researching better ships. But now that they are done, we can put our focus on the army. While it is small, its mobile warfare doctrine and it being fully mobile is making it strong. However, our main battle tanks are outdated, so further improvements of our design are on the way. Another thing that has to be improved is our marines. Currently we have 0 deployed and their doctrine and division layout are horrible. Since they are extremely important for future warfare, we added more brigades and support units, and started training 2 of them. We plan to expand them further in the future, but this is enough for now. The time is ripe to start the reclamation of the old empire. Because once, a long time ago, the Queen was the ruler of an empire stretching around the world. These days of glory will soon be back. It all starts close to us, in Ulster. Their independence was a massive mistake that has to be fixed. Our marines are already ready to cross the sea to Belfast, and with our air force and navy ready as well, we launched the invasion. Supported by 8 infantry divisions, we threatened to land everywhere we could. However, our infantry were horrible at naval landings and lost almost immediately. So thank God for our marines who fought their way up the beaches of Belfast and captured the city. With the city and its port captured, the Ulster army was doomed to defeat and many fled to neighbouring Ireland. Soon as Foyle was seized, the Ulster government surrendered and we won our first war to restore our old glory. We will now continue to Ireland and unite the British Isles. And this war we won't have to use our marines, since we already have a border with them. It will also be the first time we use our new main battle tanks. After the Queen restored the title of the United Kingdoms of Great Britain and Ireland, we declared war. Despite them having tanks as well, they were only lightly armored, so our main battle tanks destroyed plenty of them. Soon their defensive lines were broken and our tanks, supported by infantry on the flanks, flooded the gap. The Irish, having no reserve units, couldn't stop us, and we had soon cut their country in 2 and entered Dublin. As we started clearing out the south and captured Cork, the Irish government surrendered and we have united the Isles. With the addition of the Irish and Ulster industries, we are closing in on Germany. While they have more military factories, our amount of civilian industry and the fact that we have gone up to partial mobilization means we will soon fly past them. With the Isles now united, further expansion will be focused on retaking our colonial empire, and we will start in West Africa, where the Queen is needed to remove their corrupt leaders. We are really lucky that we still have control over Gibraltar and some islands in the Gulf of Guinea, because otherwise naval invasions would be really difficult. We started by attacking Gambia. While it severely hurt our relations with the Organization of African Unity and ECOWAS, they know there is nothing they can really do. While we expected to land immediately, they had tanks that stopped all tries of landing and we were forced to abort the mission. Instead of trying again, we turned to Ghana, which had an even smaller army. Using their large coastline, we landed around their capital, and with our marines already having entered the city, we overwhelmed their forces and reclaimed our first colony. And now that we have our first territory in West Africa, we won't have to naval invade everyone. And while we will have to attack countries who weren't our colonies before, our cabinet will easily justify this to the English people. As the port in Accra had finished its expansion, we started the wars. While we fought our way through Western Africa, we created the Imperial Alliance together with Spain and Morocco. Something you might have noticed due to the high amount of Spanish and Arabic-speaking troops fighting in Nigeria. We've also started preparations for the next wars. We sent an ultimatum to Cyprus, but they sadly rejected. So as the war in Nigeria was over, we declared war and launched a naval invasion for Mallorca with our 5 improved marine divisions. Why we started so fast is because this island is incredibly important, as it will serve as a forward base for our operations in Northern Africa and Arabia. So we were extremely happy once our marines, despite being sent off from southern Cyprus, managed to land in the north. Then, as the Cyprian army failed to kick us out several times, their disorganized units stood no chance at defending their capital. Now that Cyprus is secured, we can move to the mainland. We started with the Confederation of Palestine, where we managed to land in its most northern tip, only thanks to our air force and drones dealing massive damage to their infantry and tanks. After having waited for them to deplete their reserves and them having more than 100,000 casualties already, we launched a second naval invasion straight for their capital. As we started to enter the city, we also began attacking from the north, and together the 2 offensives encircled several divisions and captured Jerusalem, forcing the Confederation to surrender. While this is great news and all, sad news have reached us from Britain. Queen Elizabeth is dead. She died too soon to see her empire restore, but without her we would have never started. A month of sorrow will be held in Britain, and Charles III will be inaugurated soon after. But this won't stop our expansions. Queen Elizabeth would have wanted us to continue. Together with the Spaniards, we overran Jordan and turned to Egypt, one of the most important of our old colonies due to the Suez Canal. The plan to defeat their large army was super simple: encircle them all in the Sinai Peninsula, and it was executed just as easy as it was planned. Our marines landed on the east of the Suez Canal while our tanks rushed west from Gaza. We are unsure how many divisions there were in the encirclement, but it was definitely more than half of their army. Now, instead of trying to cross the Suez Canal with low supply, we did another naval invasion to Alexandria. And it had to be the easiest yet. It was so successful, in fact, we captured enough territory to safely send over our tanks. With their help, we crossed the Nile into Cairo and encircled their troops protecting the Suez Canal. As they were destroyed, the Egyptian army was reduced to rubble and our tanks could easily drive further south along the Nile until the Egyptian government surrendered. What comes now is a long operation where we will drive through all of Africa down to Cape Town. It all started with Sudan, but then due to horrible supply in the south, we took a detour through Yemen and Somalia, who had refused to give us Somaliland. Then Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania and the rest of all our colonies except South Africa were captured. In addition, Mozambique was also colonized to make our invasion of South Africa easier. Because with their mountainous terrain, they are the strongest of our opponents yet. Still, with our new modern tanks, we have nothing to fear. After a short attack from their side, we commenced our own offensive towards Pretoria, one of their 3 capitals. The resistance we met was much lighter than we had expected, so as we captured their administrative capital, we decided to continue. And it was the best decision we could have done, since the South African army had basically stopped resisting. Our infantry quickly drove south and soon arrived in Port Elizabeth, dividing the country in 2. While we started destroying the forces in the encirclement, we continued to Cape Town. We had prepared a naval invasion to the city, but it wasn't needed as there was only a single garrison. Once the city was captured, the South Africans surrendered and our adventure in Africa has been completed. Without taking a pause, we turned back to the Middle East, where we failed to land in Abu Dhabi, and instead attacked Oman to reach them from land. Fearing that naval invading Qatar would fail as well, we declared war on the King of Oil, which only felt like a speed bump, and opened a bigger front with Iraq and Qatar. Qatar and all its oil fell first. Then Iraq was blitzed down. While they had a massive army, their lack of tanks and anti-tank weapons doomed them to total defeat. With the Arabian Peninsula completely under our control and all the oil we could ever need in our hands, we can continue eastwards to the British Raj, the last colony before we will have to go to war with the Americans for Canada. On the Indian subcontinent, a lot has happened. Several years ago, India and China went to war. However, there was no fighting. The only one trying to gain ground are the Indian allies in Japan. Then, out of nowhere, the delicate balance was broken by Pakistan, who have swept through India. Our plan is now to help India by defeating Pakistan, then backstab them and secure the whole subcontinent. We easily landed in Karachi, and with only 2 divisions defending the area, we captured Huberdad as well. With still no big army arriving to reinforce, we continued north and encircled 2 divisions by capturing Quetta. As our tank divisions arrived, we drove north even faster, and with all their tanks being outdated and unable to destroy ours, we soon arrived to Punjab and entered all its cities, which led to the Pakistanis surrendering. In the peace deal, India took almost everything. However, we declared it invalid, declared war on India and sent over the rest of our infantry and tanks. As the Indian army started arriving to the front, we ended what the Pakistanis had started. And with the Indian army having already been defeated once, the second time went much faster. Despite us meeting Soviet and German volunteers for the first time, New Delhi was captured after only a week of fighting and the volunteers were easily encircled. After about 2 more months, we had reached all major cities and the Indian government surrendered. A few more months of invasions, all Raj territory was back under our control. We had tried to continue even more towards the east, but failed to land in Malaya, and since we don't necessarily need all its rubber, we decided to simply give up trying and turn to the New World instead. More specifically to the American Democratic Republic. They have been at war with Mexico and the Catholic Treaty Organization for what feels like an eternity, and despite them killing millions of them, they themselves have zero manpower after conscription was removed. So the war will hopefully not be too difficult. We plan to use Bermuda, Turks and Caucasus Islands to naval invade Nova Scotia first, then Florida. After preparing for a long time, during which Charles III died and was replaced by William V, we declared war in January 2022. We had some trouble to gain naval superiority at the start of the war, but as we amassed our whole fleet, we succeeded and immediately launched our invasion force. With only a single normal American division, the landing was simple for our elite marines and they could move to secure the rest of Nova Scotia straight away. One of our 10 marines even arrived to the port in St. John before any Americans did, which will allow us to secure a better position on the American continent. However, to hold the city was difficult as French and German heavy tank volunteers reached the city and tried to enter it. Luckily, our marines are equipped with anti-tank weapons and could stop them, so we could continue north along a river until we had entered Quebec. As our infantry and tanks arrived from England, we sent our marines to the south to prepare for a second naval invasion. While we waited for them to finish their preparations, we used our tank force to advance into core American territory this time. Although we had only planned to capture Maine, they had almost no divisions behind their lines. So once we broke through, we drove all the way to Boston, their capital. After that, we turned north and circled the French volunteers and captured Quebec City. Meanwhile, in the south, our marines had landed without resistance in Tampa and Jacksonville. They had then managed to fight their way to Miami and secure the whole of the Floridian Peninsula, creating a second front for the Americans to stress about. We will now bring in the tanks and crush America once and for all. With war support plummeting and people around the USA being increasingly hostile against their government, the American army collapsed before we had even reached Texas. We must now divide America between all fighting factions. Unfortunately, since America is so big, there were minimal conflicting claims. We got all of Canada, the 13 colonies, and established 4 friendly monarchies in Alaska, Cascadia, the Midwest, and the Great Lakes. Mexico got all of Greater Mexican territories where they established their own puppet states, and finally Spain got Florida and some southern states as thanks for their help and loyalty. But there is one thing we miss: Australia. They became an American puppet a long time ago and we have now been able to take it for ourselves. While we still lack several colonies such as New Zealand and we are still at war with Japan and Malaya, the king has decided that it's time to focus on internal matters and to pacify each of our colonies more thoroughly. And even if we don't have all our colonies, we are still the strongest nation in the world, both militarily and economically. Thanks so much for watching and please consider subscribing, because the next video is one many have asked for. No, it's not Spear 2, but I promise it will be a great video.